My name's David Sloane, and I'm the Chief Agronomist with Grow Guru. We've developed some pretty cool technology recently, and I'd like to introduce that to you. It's called a wireless underground system, where we can take a soil moisture probe and bury it underground permanently. I've been working in this industry for a long time, and over that time, I've had some comments that keep cropping up. Comments about soil moisture probes. Things like, hey, they don't help because I'm doing everything I can. Or, I don't have enough water. Or, I tried them and all they said was I needed more water. And of course you get the oldie, the goodie, they're too expensive. So some of the comebacks to that are say that you're doing everything you can really means that you know everything there is to know about irrigation management. But quite frankly, you don't know what you don't know. To say I don't have enough water it's not about how much you have, it's about how you use it. And when you apply it, how much you apply at certain times. You can get major benefits just by taking the same volume of water and applying it in the right way. And to say that I didn't have enough water doesn't take into account the big picture. So previously, the current paradigm is what can I do in my cropping season? Whereas we can take that over a whole year, expand that out, and there are times when there's no crop in the ground where you do have enough water. So we can look at all of that as well. And to say that they're too expensive really devalues your water. It's your most limiting resource. And you can't afford to manage what you don't measure. And so you've got to measure it to manage it. And it's too expensive, or the opportunity cost is too great to not manage it. So what I'd like to cover today is what is the technology, how do I use it, and to go into more depth about what we never knew we were missing. Now we can not just look at what goes on in the season, we can look at what goes on throughout the entire year and string years together. I'd like to show you about our software, and I want to talk about how we make money from probes. I'd also like to talk about the return on investment and how we support them. So let's start off with what is the technology. So I mentioned that I've been working with soil moisture probes for a long time now, probably more than 20 years. And the technology fundamentally hasn't changed. There's been some small adjustments on installation and so on and so forth. But essentially what we've got is a plastic tube that has electronics inside. It's got sensors at different depths. And so we connect that up to a logger with telemetry and measure each of those different depths simultaneously at defined intervals, usually about every 30 minutes, through the day and night, through the entire time that it's installed. So you get this continuous stream of what's going on in the root zone. Really important. And we've been able to make some huge changes, huge advances in irrigation management because of that. But the downside is that I have to wait until the crop has emerged from the soil. So I've got to plant the crop. So let's say my corn, wait for it to emerge, then get to sort of V2, V3, and then run around like a crazy thing trying to get these installed. And of course, everyone wants to plant at the same time. So there just isn't enough hours in the day or days in the week to get all this stuff installed. There's a fundamental limitation on installation. And then, of course, at the end of the season, I have to get it out of the way again. So we have to run around once again like a crazy thing and extract all this equipment. So you put it in, pull it out, put it in, pull it out. And for the majority of the time, it's actually sitting in the shed where it's not really doing you any good anyway. So there's there's so much good that we've had from soil moisture probes, but there are also a lot of downsides too. And those downsides are just a fundamental barrier to scalability. And so we've solved that. And what we've done is we've taken that same probe and we've connected it to a logger that sits under the ground. And so that talks wirelessly. That logger has a battery and a transmitter, and it transmits to it's a near-field communication system, so it transmits to a relay point in the field. So the thing is, it's cable-free. So what we do is we bury the probe, and quite simply, instead of having a cable and the whole thing having to get removed, we just have to remove the transmitter, and we can farm over the probe. It's really cool. And the other thing is that when we do take that transmitter away, we can log the data underground for 6 weeks. And so it gives me time at planting time. I can have nothing in the field, just go and plant. At harvest time, I can take everything out and harvest. and yet I won't lose any data, providing you get the transmitter back within that 6-week time frame, which gives us a lot of time. So it's a really huge advancement. And the other thing is that the battery, we built this thing to last 5 years. I didn't actually think it would even last a year, but here we are 4 years in, and we're not even at half battery life. So our engineers have actually exceeded what we set out to build, and we're expecting this to last for at least 7 years, maybe 8. It's tracking along really well, and we offer a 5-year warranty on the part that goes underground. So that's really cool as well. It takes that risk away from you. So as I said, we've had 4 years of data already, and this is performing super, super well. Really, really pleased with our product. So some of the benefits that we get from this, year-round data, that's huge. I'll go into that. We can install in the fall. So the best time to install is actually straight after the previous crop, because you've got all the plant lines there, you've got all the wheel tracks from your pivot, you know exactly where to put it in, but you also get to collect any winter moisture, any snow melt, and you've got plenty of time for it to bed in. The 7 years of continuous data that I mentioned, that's huge. The measuring winter moisture, let's hope we get some, but it's been pretty dry in the southwest areas the last few winters, but which has also put a premium on knowing what's actually out there, because if you don't get the rainfall, you need to be able to manage that pre-season irrigation, which everyone does in that area. So we need to manage cover crops, or we can manage cover crops. So the jury's out in some areas on whether cover crops are a good thing or a bad thing. You know what? You're going to know. You're going to know whether those cover crops are taking up moisture that you want to hold back for your summer crop. So when you see those cover crops really start to use water, you can hit them with herbicide and terminate them. So that's a cool thing too. Long-term benchmarking. So that's I've got some good case studies on this, but we can really look at changes in practice. If I change my irrigation practice, change nozzles, change the way I do it, if I go from sprinkler to dragon line or something like that, mobile drip irrigation, I can see what's the effect of that, and I can manage it. Well, measure the change, benchmark my change. I can look at soil health improvement, so I can see with soil health and how quickly my roots go down, how quickly water infiltrates. So it's about soil structure, and we can master new cropping systems. So if we want to change things around, we can make the comparison, and we can say this year versus last year versus the year before, and we can really see that improvement over time. And that's the cool thing about being able to join data sets together. Manage double crop silage for those of you who are in areas that you cut corn silage and wheatlage, or you can. Previously, you had to get the probe out of the way, so you could cut the silage and you have to put it back in, and it was mess. So now you just put it in and leave it in and just farm straight over the top of it. And we get the opportunity to overlay irrigation and rainfall for those people who are using in the pivot track footprint, which is really the northern Texas, southwest Kansas. Another cool thing about not having cables is if you graze your circles over the winter, we can just take that telemetry. Normally it would stand on a pole, but we can take that and we can actually hang it on the pivot, and there's nothing there for the cattle to rub on, to graze on. The pivot does need to be over the top of the probe site to collect data, but that's not a problem. And if you do need to roll the pivot out of the way, we've got 6 weeks to roll it back and not miss out on any data. So we can get that out of the way of cattle. If you have drip irrigation, this is perfect. The thing about drip is that you've got very narrowly defined wetted zones. So you've got wet soil and dry soil. It's kind of like being at the beach. You've got the water and you've got the dry sand, and there's a pretty strong demarcation line. Now you'll get some wave action, which is like the irrigation, but you need to be in a very precise location, kind of where those waves come up and down on the beach. If you're too far up the beach and it's dry, you won't see anything. If it's too close to the emitter, it'll be wet and you won't see anything. So we need to find that critical wetted, like the zone that wets and dries, and put it in there. And so we've got some very good rules of thumb on where to put the probes in relation to an emitter. But traditionally what you have to do, or I guess in any scenario, to find the emitter, you've got to dig it up, and it takes time. And in a traditional scenario, the crop would already be planted, so you've got to go up the plant row, sort of 10 feet, and find an emitter and then stretch out a tape and then assume that your emitters are at certain points and then install your probe. Whereas there's no crop when we install in the fall or in the springtime, maybe the winter if the ground doesn't freeze. So you can dig up the tape and you can put that probe in an exact place relative to the emitter. So you can get a very repeatable result. But the best thing is you don't pull it out again. So you put it in and you learn what that wetting pattern is like. And if we were in a traditional installation, end of the season, pull it out. Next year, you put it back in, you're going to be in a different spot and it's going to react differently and it's going to be very hard to manage. So this is a perfect partner for use with drip. If you're growing alfalfa or any other hay crop, quite simply, we can put that telemetry and we can install it in such a way. I mean, the probe goes in and it can be just under the ground and that's great. So we're not missing any measurement zone, but with the telemetry we can simply put a post in the ground so that everything is below grade. So we can just stand it on a post and pull it out and roll straight over the top with a swather, rake, baler, and it's not in the way. While all that's going on, if the telemetry is not in the field, we're still collecting data. So great system there as well. So let's switch gears on you. Let's talk about how we use soil moisture probes. So this is a trace from, it's a single line which shows all the sensors of a probe put together. And quite simply what we're seeing here is these stair steps. And those stair steps are really cool because they're very repeatable. And what they show is that the plant drinks during the day and it rests at night. And it drinks during the day and it rests at night. So when it drinks, it dries the soil out. And that's what we're seeing here. And so that drinking, that stair stepping, is the heartbeat of the crop. We can actually see how quickly the crop is growing. And that's such a cool thing. And then, of course, when we irrigate, the soil moisture wets up again. And so we can see that too. So this wetting and drying is a very repeatable process. And we can learn so much from what's going on in there under the ground. Remember that the only way of getting water and nutrients into a plant is through the roots. And we're growing in those roots every year, so we need to manage the irrigation in such a way that we maximize the root activity. And we've learned by using probes how to do that. And so there's some, it's not rocket science, especially when you can see what you're doing. So the old measure it to manage it scenario. So here we've got 6 different colored lines, and those colored lines are the different sensors at different depths in that probe. And so we're measuring them all simultaneously every 30 minutes. And what we can see here, where these arrows are, is that we have a flat line because there's no root activity, and then it starts to step. And so we know when the roots have got to that particular line, that particular depth. And we can watch these roots going down over the course of the season to different layers in the soil. And we can watch that root growth, and that's so important. I've seen a lot of people come up short at the end of the season because they've irrigated the wrong way and they've created an artificially shallow root system. They didn't know it, and they went out there at the end of the season and with maybe a penetrometer or a push probe and said, hey, I can get this thing in really easily into the soil. I've got all this soil moisture, which is true, but they didn't have the root system to pull the water out again. So it's like having a tall glass with a short straw. If you can't get it out, it's useless. It might be good for next year, but it's not good for this year. And I've seen a lot of farmers come up 20 bushels short on a corn crop simply because they didn't know what they had to deal with, and they thought they were going to get all the water back, and they didn't. Similarly, if we look at this same data set and we look at the wetting up, and I've circled some scenarios here where we can see that this blue line, the water went into the blue line, it went into the green line, just touched on the red line there, but when we look at this blue, we can see we didn't quite get back to where we started. So it's kind of half filled that layer. And so you can see the same thing with the green. The following irrigation here, it came up even shorter. So there has been water going in, but it hasn't refilled the soil. Not until you get back to some of these later irrigations where we can see that we're actually starting to fill the soil back up. This particular one here, the orange line wets up, but the gray line doesn't. That grey line happens to be 40 inches down. This happens to be 32 inches down, and we can see exactly how deep the water went in the soil. The thing about these sensors is they measure very discrete horizontal layers in the soil. So we know with total confidence how deep that the roots have grown. We know how deep the water has penetrated. And by knowing those two things, you know what the target is, my root zone, and we know whether we've got water on target, or it's gone too deep, or if it hasn't gone deep enough. Really, really critical things to know. So we can go back to that single black line, which is in our case, all of the sensors averaged together. And this is like a gas gauge for the soil. And so we can actually work out through, I guess, just through repetition, through observation, how wet the soil can get. And then we can start to see, okay, did I wet the soil back up to full again? And we can also have a template to show this is what we want to do. This is the soil moisture conditions we want to hold that crop on any particular day of the season so that we've got the right amount of water available to that crop at the right time. And so we can see the green zone goes down. Why? Because we're growing our roots in. And then we're trying to hold the moisture conditions, and at the end of the season, we're trying to dry it out. So we've actually got a light blue zone to say, you know what, the soil can hold that water, but we don't want it to. We want to actually dry it out. So we've got a target. It's a roadmap. And if you think about a crop being a factory, so you take that seed, you take water, nutrients, and sunlight, and you turn it into something that you harvest and ultimately sell. And so you're taking that water and turning it into money. Well, there's just like any factory process, there's a preferred way to make that conversion of water into money. And that's what we're trying to capture here with these templates. So you have different templates for different crops, different templates for different soil types. But essentially, this is the roadmap to follow so that you're going to get a very repeatable outcome. And we might start out in year one with a reasonably wide template because we're learning. And then as we go through into year two, into year three, we're streamlining these templates to really customize them and give you the best outcome for that crop in that location. And so that's what we talk about with strategic irrigation templates. We've got a strategy to follow, and we want to follow that every single year. So this particular presentation is specific to the northern Texas, southwest Kansas area, and I've personally been working in that area since about 2009. And these are some of the learnings that we've learned in the last 12 years. And number one, just using normal probes. As the seasonal install and remove, we learned how to manage irrigation or how to manage irrigation depth, which really we needed to slow down. So in that particular area, what people have learned, they used to put on about an inch every 4 days. So they'd run their pivot, so it would make a complete loop in 4.5 days, put an inch of water on. What we found, especially in some of the really drought years, is that water didn't go very deep at all. And so they were wasting it. It was just evaporating and not using it very efficiently. And so they slowed down. And now that the typical irrigation pattern is about 2 inches every 8 days, or the water is dropping off, so maybe 10 or 12 days. But to run slow, just like watering your home garden or your lawn, you want to irrigate slow and deep. And so we really, really learned that using probes. We've learned how to manage different application methods. So people have changed from sprinkler mode to bubble mode, where they're bubbling water onto the ground, and they've changed their nozzle spacings, and they've changed their nozzle packages, and they've tried different things. We've learned all of that by watching what happens under the ground, and we've really learned some pretty cool stuff on how to manage that. And the farmers in that area, so let's take an area, say Dumas, Sunray, just north of Amarillo. Some of our customers are now growing higher yields with far less water than they did before. The water's dropping off. They're not even trying to use less. They're just forced to use less. But they're actually growing higher yields. They're not only just maintaining it, but they're increasing because they're watching what they're doing and they're measuring it to manage it. If you see where the water goes and you're putting fertilizer in the water, you can manage the fertigation. We've learned also when to stop irrigating. So these are all things that people have made a lot of valuable decisions, made a lot of profitable decisions over the last 10 or 12 years by using this technology. And all of that is baked into the cake. It's still, when we're talking about a probe using our WUGS system, our wireless underground system, You get all the in-season management, which is what we've just talked about, lots of benefits, but now you get a lot more. So what is it that we never knew we were missing? Now that we've got all the whole season mapped out, there's some pretty cool stuff here. So soil moisture probes, when you look at that root zone and you see what, where I talked about water and nutrients getting into a plant through the roots. Well, all that magic happens underground where you can't see it. And so it's like a black box, right? And what soil moisture probes have done, it's like an X-ray is to a doctor or an ultrasound or an MRI. You've got to be able to look inside to be able to diagnose what's going on and to come up with a strategy on how to do better. And so that's exactly what we've learned. And so this probably to most of you looks a bit like an X-ray. It's just a whole lot of, it's a big fuzzy picture, but the answers are in here. The thing is that we plant our crop back here, and then, as I said, you had to let it germinate, let it emerge, get a plant stand, and then you'd run around trying to get the probe installed. And so it's just, the season's already off and running, and some farmers, best will in the world, you're trying to get it in nice and early at V3 on corn, doesn't go in till V5, V6. The crop's already using some moisture, so you might not capture the early season data that you're looking for. And that early season data is really, really critical for setting your full points. So what's the full point? It's how much water the soil can hold. So if you think about it like a potted plant and you keep adding water on the top and you see it sort of drain, it can't get any wetter. Well, that's what's happening when we look here with these lines. They bump up because water's applied and they drop back down. They bump up and they drop back down. So we can actually look across here and see, okay, I know how wet this soil can be. The trouble is most of that happens prior to when the probes are actually put in. So you may or may not capture that full point. And especially if the probe goes in a little late and the crop's already using some moisture, you may not capture your baseline, and that everything else is set by that. So if you don't even capture it, that's a problem. And then the other thing is, if I just put my probe in and I'm looking sort of down deep underground, and if I get a flat line, I don't know. All I can tell you is that the soil moisture hasn't changed. I don't know whether it's flat because it's wet. I don't know if it's flat because it's dry. It's just not changing. And yet, if I pan back and I capture all of the data from even before planting, I can actually see that the moisture has stepped up. It's stepped up. I've caught irrigation that's come from above, and I can see it's gone in there. So by the time I get into the season, I know there's water in there because I've seen it go in. So then I can also take it back out again at the end of the season. And I can do that with total confidence. And then at the back end of the season, so what would normally happen is that you would say, hey, I've just made my final irrigation decision. I'm shutting down. Probe's got no more value to me, no more decisions to make, so take it out. And a lot of people, busy farmers, but large farms with lots of equipment, hey, we're going to go and extract it all now, and things are planted at different times. Maybe some fields are planted later, but they get extracted with all the rest because that's the day to extract. And, there happens to be the service guy in the area that day, and they probably come out too soon. So, it's not just about making your final irrigation decision. It's about learning where you finished. And that is super critical, especially if you've got to go and wet the soil back up again, and there's a risk that you might not do that. So we can see here that even after the probe might have normally been extracted, there's actually been some water use down deep. We learn things about this crop that we probably never knew. And it's that old adage of you don't know what you don't know. You never knew what you were missing. And we can sort of see that, hey, some crops are probably much tougher than what you gave them credit for. But what's the most important thing is where you finished up. How much moisture was there at the end? And that's what you want to know. You do want to dry the soil out because you don't want to run heavy machinery over wet soil. So you are trying to dry it out in a measured way. And so that's really critical. But then also, where did you end up is even more critical, especially if you don't get the rainfall to fill it back up again. So here we are now looking at multiple years. And if I was putting that probe in, running it through the season, extracting it, put it in the shed, put it back in next year, put it in the shed, I would get a whole series of data that looked like this. And quite frankly, this data from 2019 wouldn't marry up to 2020, wouldn't marry up to 21, etc. Why? Because I pulled it out of the ground. These are pretty sensitive sensors. So they do. If I took a probe out of the ground and I put it straight back in the same hole on the same day, I'm going to get a slightly different set of numbers, just the way they line up. It's pretty fickle like that. But once it's in, it's actually really, really, really repeatable. So when I get back to that same position, I know I'm at the same moisture content. And so I can really rely on that relative measure. And that's how we use them. But when I pull them out, I don't get that value. But if we leave them in, we don't get a series of snapshots that, quite frankly, don't relate to each other. We get the movie, and that movie totally relates. So I can build from one season to the next season to the next season. And it's so cool to be able to join these dots and actually learn from one year to the next. And quite simply, we didn't even know how wet we should have been in year one here until we got to year 2 and year 3 and year 4. We can actually know how wet is wet. So when we talk about capturing all the value, right, it's not just the in-season data, it's all of the dry down, it's all of the winter moisture, it's all of the wetting up and repeat. It's this is so critical to know not just what happens in the season. As I said, probes have been so useful in season. We've learned so much. People have made so many valuable decisions. We get all of that baked into the cake. But what we also get is all of this extra stuff. And that, depending on where you are, it can be the most critical data. So when I say depending on where you are, if you're in an area that needs to pre-irrigate, such as northern Texas or southwest Kansas, knowing this is absolutely critical, because that's the time where you can change what you do. You can be putting on more than what the crop's using. You know, it's not just, hey, I'm a deficit irrigator, I'm doing all I can do, I can't make any decisions. Yes, you can. You can make a decision. You can make a decision right now over the winter and know exactly where you are on any tick of the clock and what you've got to do to get back. And so we can actually see here that this was a corn crop. It's a corn, cotton rotation. And, you know, trying to fill the profile with back after a corn crop with a little bit of help from Mother Nature didn't need a lot of irrigation. But trying to fill after a corn crop with no help from Mother Nature, you know, it's twice the amount of water I've got to put back in the soil. After a cotton crop, you know, no help from Mother Nature, it's even more than after corn. We expect that. Cotton's very thirsty crop, doesn't get a lot of irrigation, very deep-rooted, so it'll take the moisture out. But here we are with an even longer fall. Took a lot, it just nice warm conditions, and it just kept growing and growing and took a lot of moisture out of the soil. And so even more, even longer pathway back. And, you know, so if we knew that this happened to be, say, 8 or 9 inches, you know, I can look at that and go, okay, in a relative sense, I'm probably looking at 11 to 12 inches to put back in there. A lot of water. And you can also be looking at that saying, hey, if I can only put on an inch a week, it may take me 3 months to fill this. But if I've got to have it full by May, you know, I've got to go back April, March, February, and I need to start irrigating in February. And if I don't, I'm going to be too late. And so knowing this is super critical. So, you know, where can we add additional value? So the part that was missing before, we can now manage cover crops. We can double crop. So it's not just, you know, in the corn silage, which is the most valuable thing. It's also in the wheatlage or in the triticale or whatever your rotation silage crop is. And we can also look at the soil health, you know, carbon sequestration. That affects, like the organic matter, which is carbon, affects soil structure. Soil structure shows up as better water holding capacity, better infiltration, all of those sorts of things. So we really can measure that too. So some of the benefits of long-term data. We get one long, unbroken data stream. So what does that mean? Well, that means that we can capture the wettest and driest points. We don't have to estimate. We don't have to try and calculate. We just watch and learn. And over the course of time, we will capture that. So generally speaking, the wettest time is before the traditional probe was installed, and the driest time is after the traditional probe is extracted. So we capture that. But then you've got year after year after year, and we can capture those anomaly events as well. But the coolest thing here is to utilize this data for artificial intelligence and machine learning. And so a lot of companies out there with a lot of really cool automated routines to capture and measure different things. But if the data doesn't have it, then the artificial intelligence is limited. If I haven't caught the wettest point, if I haven't caught the driest point, I can't use that for learning. So best will in the world, I can be super slick with all my computer routines. But if I don't have the data, I can't give you the answers that you're looking for. It's like trying to make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. It's just impossible. So we need to capture that data, and once we do, boy, the things we can do with with advanced computing are really cool as well, and really accurate. We've got time to link to other software, so anyone that's been in this industry knows that it's just crazy busy at the start of the season, and then you're installing, and then install over 4-week period, maybe longer, and then by the time you've got the last installs done, the first installs are almost ready for extraction. And so it's just this cycle where you never get time to do anything else. But if you're putting it in the fall, you've got plenty of time over the winter to start to generate AI linkages. But what's the coolest thing is that, hey, I only have to do this once every 7 years. So once I've set it up, I've got lots of time to make those linkages to other software programs. I can utilize variable rate. Why? I mean, I could do that anyway, except that I don't have enough time to put all this equipment out. Whereas now I can be installing in the fall. Instead of having 1 month to install, I've now got, say, 5 or 6 months to install, and I only have to install every 7 years. That's probably a 35 times greater install window that I've got compared to traditional probes. So now I can put out a lot more of them. And I can put out multiple probes per circle, and I can set up my variable rate systems really accurately. And I got to tell you, I believe this is a forerunner to automation. So once you've got the ability to scale up, once you've got the time to generate all the linkages, we can really use this permanent WUGS system to as a forerunner to control. I think this is going to be the next wave it's going to do for irrigation management what guidance has done for tractor driving, hands-off steering. It's the start of a revolution. So let's have a look at the software. The software is really cool, both web and iOS based, but essentially what we're trying to do is put the power of profit in the palm of your hand. So it's there online when you need it. That data comes from your field and is available via the web or iOS apps. So as we can see here, you can run it on your laptop, your iPad, your iPhone. We can share data easily between you and your consultant, or the consultant and the farmer, whoever needs to see it, daily alerts and alarms, etc. So the whole point here is to be in control all the time. So being in control, I talked about a factory. I see this as, the crop being the factory. You've got a process to follow. And just like any factory, we want to have alerts and alarms. We want to be able to see in our control room a bank of green lights to say everything's running well. And we all know it doesn't work like that. That's not the real world. So when things go wrong, pivot gets stuck, things get dry, I want to see that too. And I want to have that in a way that benefits me, so we can look at it on a map, we can look at it in a list, we can see lots of little graphs. There's lots of ways of looking at this. But the whole idea here is that we put data in front of you so you can make decisions really fast and bring that important data to your attention in real time. So if we take a deeper dive on the mobile phone, we can actually irrigate by pictures. So I showed earlier in the presentation, there was a graph with all the different colored lines, and I said that looks a little bit like an X-ray. Most people don't want to understand how to read an X-ray. Those of you who do, that's really cool. We'll help teach you as well. But if you don't, we can still irrigate by pictures. And so these pictures are using artificial intelligence to tell you how deep the roots are going in the soil, to tell you how deep water is penetrated in the soil. And we've got a whole series of gas gauges. And quite simply, how full is the soil at any particular level. So in this situation, this cotton crop, has its roots down to 24 inches, and quite frankly, it's dried out that top area where the roots are, but there is still moisture underneath. So you can know that and go, okay, is this crop going to get to it or isn't it? But you can see that in a much easier to view format than having to read a graph, and it's real quick. And we've also got a little gauge up here which shows you where you happen to be relative to the irrigation template. So all good stuff. We've got a large range of field crops. We are focusing on the broadacre row crops, throw wheat in there and a few other crops, but we've got crop-specific pictures and so on and so forth, so along with the irrigation templates. I mentioned that we can bring in irrigation and rainfall data. So if we've got those API linkages, we can show you the rainfall we have for every site. We're bringing that data in from DTN, but there are some systems where we can use rain gauges as well. So the light blue bars here are the as-applied irrigations. So from Pivot Track, we can API that data in, and so when it passes over that GPS point, the pivot, we say, okay, it was added an inch 25 or whatever, and we plot that on the graph at that date and time. And same with the rainfall. The DTN is a model. With some companies, like Pivot Track, we've got rain gauges as well. So we also calculate the season totals as well. Let's get to the good stuff. How do you make money out of this stuff? Well, I already told you about sort of final irrigation decisions and getting your irrigation depth right, etc. As I said, all of that's baked into the cake. So you get all of that plus other opportunities. And so if you come back to this, how dry is my soil? And knowing where that full point is, that full point represents your yield potential, right? If you think about how much you can convert that water into money, you get roughly 7 to 10 bushels of corn per inch of water used. And so if I'm short 3 inches, I might be short 20, 25 bushels of corn. And so I don't want to come up short. I want to make sure I have the highest yield potential I can have. So knowing what that is, not starting full, really costs you yield. And so that black line that we see in here, that's how full we can get to the soil. And so I can watch myself if I'm irrigating and I'm irrigating and I'm irrigating and I'm irrigating to get back to that point by a certain time of the year, so that, okay, now I know that I've got a chance of getting whatever my yield potential is 240 bushels, 250, or it could be 210. Depends on where you are and how much water you've got. But I can tell you, if you don't have the soil full, you're already shorting yourself. So knowing that is absolutely critical. And knowing how far you've got to go to fill the soil, you can see here that this 2022-23 winter, where this particular field finished, they have a long way back. And so you could look back and say, okay, what did it take? How many inches did I put back in after my previous cotton crop? Well, I know I've got to do more than that. How much did I put back in last year after my corn crop? I know I've got to do roughly twice that. So you can get a pretty good feel. We can add a calibration to, there is a calibration there. It's a generic calibration, so I can tell you roughly how many inches to put back in. But quite simply, if you've got good irrigation records, you can say, okay, this is what last year was, and I know I need to do, in this case, double. And so it's very, very accurate in a relative sense. So you're going to be in control, but knowing when to start is critical. And let's say that you missed that. Well, as far as pre-irrigation goes, it's essential to manage that as well. Normally, sort of my former company and the rest of the industry, these probes are sitting in the shed right now. So now being February, being wintertime, and they're not doing you any good. Why are they sitting in the shed? Why don't you put them in the field where they should be and basically not take them out, except, sorry, you have to with the old style of probe. You can't do this. And so great reason to switch. And so we want to have it out there, not only to know how dry the soil is, we want to have it out there to know to manage this wetting up. And you can try different things. People experiment. So in the season, they might be putting on 2 inches per pass. I've seen guys try 6 inches per pass in the wintertime, just to say, okay, what's the best way of doing that? I'm not going to tell you what's the best way because it's really dependent on the actual soil type, the pivot, the slope, all of that. But at least now you've got a way of working out how to do it. And every year is different. So I pointed out already, the same crops. Here is after corn with a little bit of help. Here we are after corn with no help from Mother Nature, and so on and so forth, different cotton seasons. So every year is different. But what doesn't change is that yield potential, how much water you need to put back in that soil to give yourself the best chance of being successful. And quite simply, if I didn't get back to that because it's like, oops, I wasn't watching, I haven't left myself enough time, or I thought it would rain, I didn't get the rain, or I had a breakdown, or whatever it is, if you know that you are 3 inches short, then you can actually change your plan and not put as much, like lower your planting rate, lower your fertilizer rate, save some money so that you can still be profitable. So even if you don't give yourself the optimum and you might be shooting for 250 bushels normally, you can come in and say, you know what, I'm only shooting for 210 this year, but I'm going to make it a profitable year anyway. And that knowledge is money right there. How do you make money from this? By knowing. And so it's lowering your production risk as well. So that comes into this whole deal with the whole farm approach of knowing where you are. My farm is a factory, and I've got my control room. I can control my production. And by knowing exactly how to set things up, I'm lowering that risk. I'm increasing the chance of hitting the outcome that I want. So only Grow Guru can give you those answers, because we're the only ones that can put a probe out and leave it there and have you farm over it year after year after year. So some of these seasonal differences, I showed you, this is the same farm, but a different field. This is a neighboring field on the same farm, 4 years of data. And before we had a corn-cotton rotation. This is the counter-cyclic rotation. This is starting out with cotton, which dries the soil out a lot. That got some help from Mother Nature. And then here we are after a corn crop. And then after a cotton crop, dries the soil out a whole lot more. And then we've got to wet it back up. Here we are after a corn crop. The thing was, while the other field, it was the driest it's ever been after the cotton crop, this field was actually quite wet. And so 2 fields, I don't have to irrigate much on one. I have to irrigate a lot on the other. And you know what? Just like a rental car, if I take a rental car out from the airport, it starts out with a full gas tank, well, I got to return it with a full gas tank. And so here, you can actually see, like after cotton, how much I got to put back in to refill the tank versus after corn, how much I got to put back in to refill the tank. And it's essential data. You need to know this. And unless you manage it or measure it, you can't manage it. So every year is different. Here's another way you can make money. I talked about the final irrigation. I haven't shown you. This is actually drip irrigated cotton. And this farmer in year 1 was irrigating every single day. We talked about it. He changed his irrigation strategy to irrigate every 3rd day, I believe. And we can see here that, started off wet and it's a deficit irrigation. So he's drying the soil out in a measured way, and then he got a big rainfall. So he stopped irrigating, and then he's able to let it go until he got to the same moisture content. And now, okay, what do I do? Do I keep letting it dry out, or do I irrigate again? And in this situation, this was actually a pretty warm finish in Texas in 2022, and so he started irrigating again. And he irrigated, and guess what? It's big stair steps. It's like all that water that he just put out is gone in 2 days. So he irrigated again, and then he dried it out for the finish. And so was able to actually apply extra irrigation, which would have not only given him more yield because he's finishing out that top crop, but better quality because he's actually thickening out the fibers as well. So this is real-time decision-making, and it's real-time profit. And so that's probably just added another half a bale right there just by finishing it out, making use of that nice warm conditions at the end of the season. Here's the same data. So we were just looking at this snapshot back here where he was making those extra decisions. Well, we had a chat, and you can see it's very, there's been irrigating every day and was actually wetting the crop up at a time that he should have been drying it out. And so had a bit of a chat and said, hey, you better stop and let the soil dry out a little bit. But he got down to here, and he needed to actually keep going. So still trying to have that measured approach to drying the soil out, which he then got in year 2, and by year 3, really dialed in. So this is that learning where year 1 we're benchmarking, and then year 2 you're kind of making positive changes, and by year 3 you're absolutely in control. And that's how you make money with this. So we can see here that he learned a trick in his first year with the probe that he brought back in the third year. So there's terms of stopping and then restarting. Talked about benchmarking. So benchmarking, really critical because you're not taking the probe out. So you can actually compare one season to the next season. And in this situation, this was a farmer just north of Dumas, Texas, who he knew he was struggling. He had pretty light water, 500 gallons per acre per minute, and 500 gallons per minute on 120 acres. And he was not able to keep up with the crop. So this is some rainfall. This is his irrigation strategy. It's a deficit irrigation regime. He's drying the soil out in a measured way. And he realized that maybe there's a better way. And he also knew his water's dropping off. His water actually went from 500 gallons per minute down to 400 gallons per minute. And so what he did is he put out dragon line. So it's mobile drip irrigation, really cool stuff. You attach, instead of having sprinklers or bubbles mode, you attach a drip tube to it, and you actually drip the water out directly on the soil and create wetted strips. And by doing that, he was able to maintain his yield. So his water dropped off by 20%. We had 2.5 inches less rainfall, 11 and a quarter down to 8 3/4. So it's 2.5 inches less rain. There's 100 gallons per minute less irrigation, and yet could maintain his soil moisture. And it was the coolest thing. So when we look at those individual sensors in the soil, we can see that here at 12 and at 16 and at 24 inches, they're all drying out. Whereas over here with the dragon line, I was able to maintain that soil moisture in the top 2 feet. It was still drying out down at 32 and below, but was able to really keep that core part of the root zone wet because they were putting that water straight on the ground in a defined way. And he kept his yield, maintained yield in the face of less water. So this is how we can do more with less. But the key thing here is not necessarily about the physical change. We can measure it. We can see where it's the effect of that change. And so it's not just trying something, it's understanding it. And that could be a tillage practice change. That could be just a simple nozzle change. It could be all sorts of things, a rotation. And we can see that because we're not taking the probe out from one year to the next, and those changes can be benchmarked and measured. So some of the other benefits of long-term data is we can learn how to share water between crops. And so, if we're splitting a circle, we can start to look at what's going on between, say, that cotton and corn. We can, share that within a season. We can share it between crops under the same circle, different times of the season, like summer or winter, cover crops. We can see all of that, so we can come up with our whole water balance. And, we might find that, while it might seem like it's pretty cool to have, cotton in my rotation, if it dries the soil out so much that I got to use so much irrigation to wet it back up, maybe that's not going to work for me. Or maybe I'm double cropping. I just don't have enough water to do that. And this will become really obvious once you start to track that. And so we can also learn how to, share water between fields and create multi-year water budgets. So we're not missing anything anymore. It's all there. And previously we couldn't make those comparisons in a really defined and knowledgeable way, but now we can, because we know what our soil moisture is every day over multiple years. And you can look back and you can really see exactly what happened on any day of the year and any day of that cropping cycle, and start to really manage your pumping capacity, not just in the season, but across the entire year, and see if you've got enough water to keep up. You can benchmark your operation like I just showed you. And until we could leave the probe in for years and years, 7, 8 years, this wasn't possible. but now it is using the Grow Guru WUGS system. So what is the return on investment? Typically, the equipment depends on, well, if you're taking a wireless underground system, work on a hardware cost of $3,000. There's another sensor that we can put in. I failed to mention that. So if you do need 10 inches of clear space for tillage, we can put a sensor in that space and monitor that. We need to install it once, every 7 years. And this is a radio system, so I'll throw a base station in there. So if I took 4 120-acre pivots on a section and had one base station for that, so it's 480 acres, and I took my $3,000 and I added a topsoil sensor and installed it, etc. I'm at $15,000 to monitor my 4 quarter-mile circles on that section. And if I amortize my equipment over 5 years, I'm really paying that back at $3,000 a year. I'll throw in our subscription cost on a per site per year basis, and really we're talking about $14 and change per acre per year. And so that's a little over for my 110 acres. I mean, 120 acres. We're at current corn prices today, less than 3 bushels for sure. Depends on your basis, but if you're down in that northern Texas area, you're probably looking at a couple of bushels to pay for this equipment. And the return, we're typically seeing, in the region of 10+%, but I put this in at 8%, so returning 17 and a bit, 17.6 bushels, $114 at the $6.50 corn cost. Save a little bit of fertilizer at $250 per acre of fertilizer bill and a couple of inches of water. And I'm at $131 gross return. So you net that out and it's a 9x return on your investment. If I wanted to pay for the equipment in 1 year, then I can, I've just jumped over this. Let's go back to my corn cost for 1 year to amortize my entire $15,000 in a year. We're a touch under $40 an acre. So I'm still, even to buy it, own it, run it, I'm at about $40 an acre. But for that kind of return, I'm 3xing my money just to own it in year 1. After that, once I own it, and I'm paying my $1,000 per site per season, I'm probably somewhere in the $8 and change per acre. It's just over a bushel to get to track something that has the biggest single impact on yield and quality that you can do. And then I'm going to skip over some of the other. Well, when it comes to cotton, I mean it's the same cost. If we're adding 150 pounds, we can. We're adding at 80 cents a pound. We're adding $120 an acre for a $14 cost. So, once again, we're at a very, very strong return when you're amortizing that equipment. And 150 pounds an acre is not hard to achieve when you're managing your irrigation management. So what we've got is the next step in soil moisture probe technology. It's proven. We've had it out there for 4 years. I mean, the soil moisture probes themselves haven't changed. We're using an aftermarket probe. That probe's been around for 16 or 20 years, probably 16, I think. And our WUGS has been in the field commercially for 4 years. And so it works, and it works well. And we can measure water at a time when you can make a difference. A lot of people, I mean, obviously it makes a difference in season. You can do that. But when it really makes a difference is right now when there's no crop in the ground. You can make some of the most fundamental decisions that are the most profitable. And if you're from that northern Texas area or southwest Kansas or anywhere where you pre-irrigate, the farmers that didn't, there was a very, very variable results in 22. A lot of people didn't irrigate enough prior to the season, and they came up a long way short. And so this is real. If you don't manage that properly, it's going to cost you a lot of money. So you need to do that. And you want to get process control. You want to, over the course of, say, 3 years, you want to understand and benchmark your operation. Then you want to carry that forward into proactive management. And then you just want to lock it in. So by the 3rd year, you should be really, really humming along. And so, it's not a silver bullet. It's data, and you have to learn how to read it and use it. But boy, it's the most powerful data you can collect. And we're looking to provide local agronomic support. So our whole go-to-market strategy is to find local people. So local service providers who then have a dealer network that can really provide that last mile support. So working with people that you know and trust, that's our business model, is to find the local entrepreneurs who are the local businesses who are the service providers, who can then manage their network of contacts and consultants, and who can work with you to provide that agronomic support. Of course, Grow Guru are available as well. I'm available to help with the training. We've got a tiered approach to our training as far as a lot of videos and how-to information, and so really looking to educate an industry, if you like. Comes back to this production risk. We want to make sure that you know what your number is and you hit it every year, and that you can get that consistency into your business and turn that water into the most money. Understand the process, lock it in. So, yeah, I just said it. You want to turn that water into more money. Our support network, as I said, using local service providers. Probably best to hit up our contact information on the website, and we can put you in touch with the right people. So I thank you for your time.